This week on the Agent Factory.
So we have a very special guest.
Ballinger.
With AI agents, you really do have these superpowers that you never had before.
I'm so curious.
Drum roll.
It'll be interesting to see if it even works, right?
Ready to ride the wave of innovation?
Yeah, that reminds me of how sometimes I use Gemini.
Okay, bro, consider it done. I'll make sure my responses are of the highest quality.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Agent Factory, the podcast that goes beyond the hype and dives into building production-ready AI agents. I'm Molly Pettit.
And I'm Vlad Kolesnikov. So happy to be back. And Molly, it's great to have you co-hosting for the first time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Vlad. I'm very pumped to be here. In today's special episode, we are diving deep into what it takes to go from a wild idea to a production-grade system. By the end of this episode, you'll have a better understanding of the concept of impossible computing and how AI agents are making it a reality. You will learn what it takes to vibe code something to production, and you'll get to see some really great demos and a new programming language designed specifically for LLMs. And also, we have a very special guest. In fact, we're skipping the industry pulse again this episode so we can focus on the factory floor demos and the developer Q&A with our guest.
Yes, Google keeps shipping and Agent Factory keeps hosting more people who build around our cloud platform. Please welcome Keith Ballinger, Vice President and General Manager at Google Cloud.
Hello, nice to meet you today or be on the show.
We're so glad you could make it, Keith. I figured I might actually just start by just jumping into questions right away, if you're up for it.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with a concept that you've talked about in the past. I know it's like a little blurb on your blog, impossible computing. In this new era of generative AI, what does that phrase mean to you today? And what impossible problems do you think that AI agents are maybe allowing us to solve?
It's a great question. And it's so funny because, when I put together my personal blog site years ago, I just wanted some kind of tagline. And so I used to say a lot, I love to ship, and I decided to just say something else. And so I went with, I love impossible computing. And, at the time it was glib, but I've actually thought about it, here and there since then. And to me, impossible computing isn't about, the deep, hard pieces of computer science, like, P equals NP and whatnot. It's much more about making things that were, impossible, or at least really, really hard for people, much more easy and almost, seamless for them. And so that's, everything I've been working on dev tools for, almost my entire career, going all the way back to when I was at Microsoft, working on C# and .NET, the first versions, through Copilot at GitHub to, the Gemini CLI and everything we're doing now. And the through line for me in all of those things is, helping developers do things and do them in like a just with delight and joy, like the Maria Kondo thing, what brings you joy in life. I just want the tools that I'm part of creating to kind of give people that joy, but also make them feel like they're accomplishing the impossible. And I think, we're at a huge, huge inflection point now with development. And, there's been a few, right? We went from punch cards to terminals to, you thinking about your compiler to not even thinking about that at all, to, some of the really great, WYSIWYG tools that came into existence, to all these modern frameworks and being able to stitch together all kinds of APIs, cloud computing itself, mobile. These were all big inflection points. I think this is the biggest. And I don't say that because I'm working on it, but I'm working on it because I think it is. And I doubt it's anybody's shocked by that. But with AI agents, you really do have these superpowers that you never had before. And whether you're doing quote unquote vibe coding or just using an AI agent to help you along, maybe in small ways, maybe in big ways, it really does feel like you're doing impossible things again. And I'll kind of show you some examples of that from my own personal experience. Just projects I've always had in the back of my mind that I never would have been able to accomplish before, either from a time perspective, or even in some cases like a skill perspective. And then finding ways for the AI agents to skill me up, and also to delegate to them some of the things that I'm not great at. So that's how I think about it, right? Impossible should leave our vocabulary in some ways.
Right, because what's impossible today even, maybe, just wait a few months.
Exactly.
Speaking about AI agents that you mentioned as the way to achieve something impossible or in an impossible time frame, you run quite big engineering organizations,
Yeah.
and what these organizations build is being used by a lot of people, developers, non developers around the world. So I'm curious, like with this new transformation and ability to achieve impossible, how does it? I'm curious how it transforms your own workflows, but I'm also curious to learn how it transforms this software design engineering workflows in the future. Like how do you envision them?
Yeah, I think it's there's multiple ways to kind of think about that question. There's what an individual developer does, or even an individual technologist, UX designer or product manager or manager. But there's also how the team dynamic changes and what you do as a team. And I think in all these cases, what I'm seeing with my own group, the GDE, where we do developer experiences and tools for all kinds of things, we're going through some radical changes very quickly. So, for instance, the Gemini CLI was built very quickly, cross organizationally across Google, honestly, with people from GDM and people from Vertex, my own team, and we moved very, very quickly. And we were able to move very quickly because we were bootstrapping, we were dogfooding with the CLI and changing how individuals worked, but also changing how the team worked. And we'll talk more about the individual changes, I think, later on. But in terms of the team, we started using the CLI itself as a GitHub action to triage issues. We use it to review pull requests, and that allows us to kind of delegate out things that before would require a lot of manpower. Now, it doesn't mean you just automatically close an issue or accept a pull request, but having that upfront analysis available to you as a maintainer is just super useful. And it even helps the person submitting the PR because they get those comments back and they can make changes before a human even touches it. But it changes a world from where you're not necessarily delegating to your team the more mundane tasks, so to speak, but you're letting them kind of operate at a higher level. And that's, I think, very, very fun and exciting because no one likes to do the mundane stuff, right? It's fine to read hundreds of issues and try to categorize them. We've done that and we'll do that in the future many times. But to at least have that helping hand kind of get you going, it really changes things. And, the other part of the team dynamic that changes a lot is we've all seen in like the Dora reports that we put out from Google, and that Dora organization is actually in mine. We've seen individual developer productivity go up, but we haven't always seen uh, the productivity of a team go up. And so, why is that? Well, it turns out that you have various bottlenecks in the kind of the pipeline of shipping code. And when you optimize one bottleneck, for instance, how fast a developer can create, say, high quality bug fixes or features, you find new bottlenecks. And so, what you're seeing, and what I've seen across the board, is now we have a place where the developer is so much more productive. Well, now you need your CI/CD system to be more productive. If you always wait a week or 2 weeks or a month to ship everything, it doesn't matter how fast stuff was built in the meantime. And in fact, if you build too much stuff and you don't ship often enough, you can create kind of this pressure on your system and potentially ship more broken code or bug fixes or edge cases that you can see. So it really pushes you quickly into optimizing other pieces of the whole pipeline of code. And again, that's one of the things that really interests me. The teams I have include people like Artifact Factory, Cloud Build, Cloud Deploy, and we use those systems. We use, of course, GitHub Actions for our open source, and optimizing those to ship more quickly because we're getting such a productivity increase is super important. And then, of course, that leads to things like testing. How do you create enough tests? Because you don't want to test every combinatoric available, but you certainly have the ability now to write a lot more tests, whether those are classic unit test functions or even real world end-to-end integration testing. And so now you have this increased productivity, which lets you do that, which has this knock-on effect of allowing you to have more confidence in your code and let you ship your code more faster.
Wow, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. This reminds me of something that you said in a recent interview, in which you provided what I think may be a hot take for some, which is that AI does not lead to job displacement, it leads to job change. So, as we're kind of looking into the future, what are your thoughts on what the day in the life of a human agent developer team might look like?
I think this is I do want to caveat that I don't know all professions, so I can only really speak to developers and our profession, and certainly in the the time span of the future that I can think about cogently. We're just going to change the job again. Just like there used to be someone called the linker, and their actual job was with, various code libraries that, punch cards and things like that. They linked code together. That's a gross oversimplification, but there were one day that went away. And just like, we don't, when you deal with dependencies, that's oftentimes is taken care of for you with your package manager. It's not perfect, but it's massively changed. Or like what I was saying earlier with compilers. And you can even see that in other professions. For instance, before spreadsheets like Excel or Google Sheets existed, there were these big pieces of paper on big desks that people doing accounting would use. And when we had computers that let us do this, digitally, it didn't mean there were no more accountants and bookkeepers. It just changed their job, and sometimes in very fundamental ways. So I see the same thing happening with developers. And the term I like to use is kind of like orchestrator, like you're a conductor of an orchestra. And I love that metaphor personally because I love music and I love the art and craft of software development a lot. And I like the idea that developers can think of themselves as conducting this orchestra, and the various parts of the orchestra are agents that they're asking to do things. And there's a very simple through line to that of agents that you delegate tasks to. But it's also just a really great mental model because when you think about it, when someone is when you're conducting an orchestra, you have the score and you have all the individual pieces of the score, and someone playing violins isn't necessarily looking at the score of the trumpet section, but it all comes together into a cohesive whole. And so it's the same kind of thing. You need to put together technical plans and architectures that encompass the whole system, or at least the part of the system you as a developer are working on. And then you got to think about what specifically is needed to be known at what level of granularity for those various parts of your orchestra, those agents and sub agents. And to me, that's like a very exciting way to think about it. And I think it's proving true that it's just the way the nature of the job is changing. And you're no longer going to be writing assembler or C like that went away long ago. For most people, obviously, there's still people who do it. Just like there'll still be people who do the kind of coding that's very popular today that we think about, where you open up an editor and you write code and you test it and then you submit a pull request, so on and so forth. That'll still exist, but a lot of times we'll be working at a higher level of abstraction. And I think that's where AI agents are just really unlocking that kind of
Interesting.
what felt impossible before.
So I'm a software engineer. Uh, the way this is really happening. This change, and with any change, like the one thing that I learned, especially being in this industry, like when the change is happening, you're gonna learn, and you're gonna adapt, and you're gonna embrace the change. Uh, with this big change, what are the skills that I need to learn? Should I become a product manager in a way? Like, what should I really learn on top of what I already know and like will learn in terms of like just writing code and understanding the system design?
Yeah, and it's a great question because it gets to the heart of something that I think myself and many other people in the industry who work on this are often pursuing. And it's less about a new technical skill, and it's more about the skill around design. And by design, I mean like your architectural design, not just your user experience design. But it certainly even starts with the user experience, where if you think about what developers do fundamentally, they solve a problem, oftentimes a business problem, with software, with code. That's really what you're doing as a software engineer. And the way you do that has changed, but that fundamental is still the case, even with AI assistants. And what that means is you're going to have to think more about the problem you're trying to solve. You're going to have to think more about the systems and subsystems involved, and hold that design in your head and find ways to articulate it very well into the right level of granularity for agents. What does that mean technically? Well, that's, as a skill, that's a very much a practice and a craft versus, knowing a specific API. But of course, there's ways you'll then do that. Markdown files, of course, are very popular as a way to kind of feed information that's context always to an agent or agents. And then, of course, there's the iterative approach that you take with them, say in a chat experience, although chat's not the only way to do these things. And learning what to include and what not to do is, I think, the key skill that people are going to need, along with that ability to think at a higher abstraction level. And so that, in the end, creating markdown files or doing chat is relatively simple. What really matters is, are you doing the right things there? And that's where, context engineering, as people call it, really come into play. It's not prompts. Prompts is the easiest part, but it's really about being selective. Just like if you had a new developer on your team, you wouldn't just flood them with every piece of documentation and around your system right away and the code base. You'd be selective and you'd help them get there in pieces. And that you do the same thing with AI agents. Now, there's the reverse of that, which is very interesting, where let's say I'm coming into a brownfield app, one that's existed for a while that has many systems and maybe it's been around for years. You can actually use AI to help you understand it, and that works lots of different ways. I think a lot of what we're seeing with these AI systems like Gemini and others is, even outside of the context of development, you can literally have it give it some context. You can say, look at this app, the source code here, help me learn it, guide me through learning the concepts and learning the system. And that can be as fundamental as you want. You can just give me a high level file to read of everything, or you can literally be, hey, I need to understand not only the high level architecture but more about the problem that we're solving here. Give me a tutorial, because there may be fundamental concepts I'm not aware of, and teach me those concepts. Heck, even ask me questions along the way to see how I'm doing. And I think that's another super useful part of what we get here, is that it's not just about the context that we're engineering for the agent. It's also almost the reverse. The agent's kind of context engineering for us to get to understand the system better, so that we can be better, orchestra conductors.
Yeah, that reminds me of how sometimes I use Gemini to help come up with a better prompt to then feed back to Gemini deep research,
Yeah.
because it sometimes it'll come up with something that is just more exactly what is needed. Uh,
And that's a great thing. I mean, like, I'll show you in a little bit, but one of the fundamental ways I work on like a new project is exactly that. I'll give a relatively small prompt, and then iterate with the agent on building out like a bigger chunk of understanding, whether that's an architectural documentation or just a better prompt for future conversations, or as we go along. And the same thing applies even to the other pieces of it, right? Like, MCPs are very popular now for good reasons. They really extend agent capability in a big way. And knowing what MCPs to use and knowing how to use those MCPs themselves is a skill that has to be learned. And again, it's not really a technical skill per se. It's really a workflow skill, right? It's a craft skill.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's specific to a profession, because I noticed that when I do coding, right, I'm kind of more or less confident in those prompts and how to build the context, especially with all these tools that the industry and Google are developing for us software engineers. When I try something that I'm not used to, even in the coding exercise, I see that, yeah, knowing how to build those pieces together, it really makes a difference. And when I do not know, I may ask Gemini again, or I may look for help
Yeah.
because this is something that I'm not used to.
Exactly. I mean, I even use this outside of coding per se. So, I'm a big fan of physics, but I'm not, I wasn't a physics major or, got a degree in that or anything like that. But I love to explore concepts in physics, especially like information theory and computation, and how all those things relate to our own world. And so, I'll kind of vibe physics, different concepts and things like that. And then, so I might work with the AI on, hey, here's a small paper on an idea I have. And sometimes the AI will, as I work with it, it'll introduce concepts I'm not familiar with. And I'll even create like annotated versions of those papers. And I do the same thing with code bases, right? And for instance, one of the things that we have at Google is a really great team ran by Omar Shams, and he's built a really great system for understanding your code bases into wikifying it. And he did that at startup. We bought the startup, and we're introducing that as a MCPs and various ways to give you kind of this tree, this map for how to understand existing code bases. Not only does it help you then as a person, again, we're kind of context managing you, but it's also then things you can selectively take that same wiki that's been created and feed it back in as context when it's necessary.
True.
Yeah, for sure. It's a different time. Something you actually just talked about, you alluded at least to vibing, to vibe coding. So I'm gonna switch gears in that direction. Um, you recently published a couple of open source projects, Terminus and Aether. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Um,
Works for me.
Great. Terminus and Aether that you described as being demonstrations of vibe coding intended to provide trustworthy and verifiable examples that developers and researchers can use. So I'd like to just hear a bit more about your experience with vibe coding and what role does this kind of exploratory development play for you?
Yeah, and in the end, I a lot of my coding, and I love to code. I find it, to be very relaxing. It's a hobby of mine. I don't ship a lot of production code anymore, although I did some for the Gemini CLI. But oftentimes I'll have ideas, and the world of agents has allowed me personally to kind of explore those in more detail. And so I'll show you an example. We'll start with something simple, which was Terminus. And here I just, I had the idea that I thought it would be neat, a little silly but fun, to have a Go framework that let you build a web app that looked like a terminal app. And so I just started vibe coding it, I guess you would say. And what does it do? It gives you all these. It has more features than I even thought about. Right, everything from pre-built components to this nice Elm-based MVU architecture, and then it looks like a terminal app, and with all these pieces. And here's a hello world. It's super simple, right? And it looks like kind of what you'd imagine a terminal app looks like, and even some of the same pieces. And I had it build getting started. I had it build an API reference, all of these things, and it was really straightforward to do it that way. And I can show you an example a little bit later of like how I built something like that. But fundamentally, I just what would have taken a long time took I think a weekend, where I just went to town on, just kind of iterated. And the other example you mentioned, Ether, is even more nutty. I basically had the idea, hey, what if we created a programming language for LLMs? And so I actually iterated with Gemini a lot on what would be the characteristics of a language that was optimized for LLMs. And we went down this route of like highly, explicit um, syntax and semantics. And, to a point where it's like, it's ugly if you're a human, but it's super, super deterministic. And I mean, I didn't build it to actually introduce a new programming language to the world as much as just like explore a concept and see what it would be like. And so here's Aether. And it's like I built it with Rust and LLVM, and just went to town with it. And you can see it's like an S expressions Lispy type of language, and it's crazy, right? No human would write this, but from an LLM's perspective, this is really easy to understand. And I went to town on this one. There's a lot there, and people feel free to go check it out. Google Cloud Platform /Aether. I imagine you guys will put them in the show notes. Um, it has lots of tests. It does. I have an HTTP serving example. It does FFI. You can see here. I can go look at more. Actually, there's a user guide that's really nice.
Yeah.
It all.
Wait.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting you. Is it fair to say that basically that vibe coding and like a certain approach, which I hope to learn one day, that you use, uh, helps you to bring this thing to production? Because I see like you have I think for either like 360 tests, you have a user guide, a reference guide, and the architecture, and the tests, and the code, and just pretty much everything that you would think like, yeah, this is probably a repo that a few people maintain for, I mean, at least a few months, maybe even longer. And now you say you did it over the weekend. I mean,
Well, Terminus
that's
I did over the
really
weekend. Terminus I did over the weekend. Aether was like off and on some nights and weekends for a few weeks, probably a month. But you're right. It gives you a level of comprehensiveness that lets you explore ideas a lot more. And that's where I see vibe coding in particular versus just other ways to do AI assisted development to be really interesting. Is like there are definitely going to be people who vibe code, ephemeral apps, and or just an app that they're good enough with to use. But one of the things I use it for the most is exploring ideas. And it used to be that exploring an idea was very expensive in terms of time, and the opportunity cost that comes with that. With vibe coding, where you're really delegating out almost all the work, it lets you explore those ideas much further and more deeply. And then you get all these things like you mentioned, like you get test coverage, you get a lot of documentation, and that lets you really deeply explore an idea without it being costly, which I found to be just super useful in that kind of idea exploration phase. And so for me, it's like prototypes, and it lets you look at there's like the horizons of innovation. Horizon one, what you're working on now. Horizon two, call it short and medium term ideas that you want to explore, and then horizon three being those really long term, more futuristic ideas. And you can kind of do all of those with in a vibe coding kind of way. And does that code itself actually turn into production code? I mean, probably not, but it can be certainly inspiring. I remember last year, um, the GKE team was moved to report to me, and I was playing around with kubectl, and I thought, oh, it'd be really nice if kubectl could take natural language. And so I wrote a prototype. I kind of vibe coded it, where I could say kubectl space AI space the natural language thing, like how many nodes do I have or whatever, and proved it worked. And then the GKE team took that and they rewrote it, of course. But now it became a popular open source project, and then it was integrated into kubectl itself as a command.
oh, sweet.
And so that kind of shows like it's not about the code itself living on. It's about here's a concept, let's play with the concept and let's evolve the concept. And whereas before, you know, without these kinds of tools, it would have been very hard to build that, or at least it would have taken a long time to build it. And you only have so much time. And this way, it was literally an evening just playing around with the idea, and that led to enough validation from internally using it to know that we could take more steps to actually make it, something that exists in the world.
Yeah. Would you like to show us any of these tools or your approach in action?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's show the approach. I think that would be kind of fun. People should definitely check out the repos, and feel free to send me pull requests and bug reports and all those kinds of things because I'm
I'd
certainly
also
yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'd also be curious to hear just, like, about what inspired the project also, to begin with.
Yeah, for Terminus and Aether.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Terminus, it was literally just me goofing around and wanting to, because when we were building the Gemini CLI, I got really into CLI interfaces, and then it occurred to me that, from I don't know, an aesthetic point of view, it'd be fun if you could have terminal interfaces in the browser sometimes. And so from that, it was just like, okay, I want to do something in Go, and I want to do something with the terminal and as a web app, and that just led to that. It was very much like I want to have fun and do something slightly goofy. With Ether, it was very much as I mentioned earlier, every programming language out there today was designed for humans, and what humans need is different than what an LLM needs. A lot of languages to be more useful to humans may end up having things like syntactic or semantic ambiguity. But in the context of what's going on, the code being written, it's quite easy for a human to understand. And in the end, it's like more friendly. It's more friendly to read, or it's more friendly to write, or both of those things. But my thesis was that for an LLM, it doesn't care about aesthetics, and ambiguity is not something you want to introduce to LLMs. And so then I was just like, okay, what would that look like? And then so I iterated a lot with Gemini on that, and then I designed something, and then we built it. And then I wanted to kind of play with Rust more, and I wanted to play with LLVM more because I love computer programming languages, and I love to build them, programming language paradigms and seeing how you can push them. So that's where Aether came along. And so far it's been interesting. The next steps I have on it are, I'll do some either model fine tuning or probably more likely some kind of context management based on lots of examples and the user guide and things like that, and then see how much better, if at all, something like Gemini is at writing code in Ether than it would be at the same thing in Python or JavaScript or something else. I don't have that data yet. I had to build the language first, right?
Hmm.
I'd be curious to try, because that basically becomes not vibe coding, just vibing, and Gemini will be fully coding for me and writing something
Yeah.
that
It's like a systems level, language. And so, my next step is I haven't, really decided, what I wanted to build yet. I think there's a few different ideas. And obviously in the examples are lots of like toy examples, but, maybe I can have it build a shell, for instance,
Yeah.
to like Bash, or maybe I can have it build some kind of GUI app, or, this morning I was thinking, okay, maybe I can write an HTOP replacement and see what that's like. But yeah, let me, I'll just show you, I'll show you how I kind of do this stuff. And, certainly there's no right way or wrong way. And a lot of what I will show here is, pretty normal, I think, to people who've been at it for a while. I won't use any MCPs really or anything like that. I'll just kind of show like the basic kind of idea and work.
Hmm.
And because like these core kind of ideas are, I think what's interesting.
Okay, we're now going to take a break from questions and head over to the factory floor to get hands-on with some demos.
So here's my terminal. I like to work with the terminal. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So I just have a projects folder where I keep all the subfolders and stuff. I guess we need something to build. So what should we build, actually? Any ideas, Vlad?
What language?
I mean, we can decide that later. We could,
Oh, that's how this. So you start from planning first. I see.
yeah.
I see.
Or like I start from the problem I want to solve, right? Maybe okay. Here what we'll do. We'll do uh, like a markdown formatter. So we'll say
Perfect.
MD. We'll call it viewer. MD viewer.
Can we have a UI?
Let's just like for time's sake. Well, let's just do something at a time.
Okay.
Fine. I want to kind of
I
like
know UI is always time
go
consuming.
through it. Well, even UI is pretty straightforward, but if we want to do something there, like it'll still increase the build times and things like that.
Yeah.
Because like I'm on a Mac, and so then we'd use the command line for Xcode, and all that works. I've done various things there. It just like increases the amount of
Yeah,
time.
I know. Yeah.
So I'll start launching Gemini. I have a version from source, so I have a little bit more info coming on. You can see I have a lot of MCP servers. I'm not really using any of those for this, but we'll start with this. It can be very plain English. I want to build a command line markdown viewer. It should paginate long markdown files, have some syntax highlighting, and I'll say does not include any editing features.
Yeah, just
So
makes things easier.
I'll just start here. And then one thing I always do with all of these kinds of tools is I say, just to start with, I'll see what it comes up with. So I'll say, write me a user guide and save it to userguide.md. And then I'll say, I use a cap stuff that I really care about. I'll say, wait for my review. Don't write any code yet. You don't usually have to do this, but I just got in the habit of doing it all the time. And so now it just, it's gonna think about what I gave it, which was very high level. And, in a more real example, I probably have more there that I put. But then we can just start and see what it comes up with. Sometimes I do this just to kind of see what ideas it has. And so here I like the Gemini CLI always lets you, decide how to use tools, whether to authorize them, once or always during the session. So I'll just say for the session, no problem. And so now it created this user guide. In the Gemini CLI, I can just hit exclamation point and then run a bash command. So I love Zed, which is an editor. And so we'll open up Zed. I will share Zed now. So you can see all we'll have right now is the user guide. Okay, so it's going to say MD view, the file path. It thinks it's simple and elegant. I like that as features. It renders the markdown. Okay, I like that. Space bar, go to the next page, page up, go to the previous page, queue to quit. Okay, that all seems pretty nice. I could modify this in some way. For instance, I could say, let's not call it MD view. Let's call it, MD underscore viewer or something like that. But for now, this kind of works. I don't have any real problem with that. So then I'll go back to the terminal. I will now say, okay, I like the user guide. Let's build a technical design. So I'll say, let's build a technical design for MD view. And here I could ask it what programming languages to use. So let's do that. Let's see, what language do you suggest we use? And I almost always ask for options. So I'll say, give me 3 options and your final recommendation. And after I tell you, we'll write the technical design. So let's see what it comes up with. And it's probably going to say like Go, TypeScript, Python, maybe Rust. We'll see what it comes up with. And oftentimes it'll think about this and think about it from like, hey, what's available. So here we can see, okay, Python, because you got like things like rich and pigments. Go's nice. The Glamour library is really nice. I love the Glamour library. And for instance, it says, hey, you know what? It's not as flexible as rich from the Python world, which is nice. Rust, obviously be very fast and performant. And there are crates for it, but it's a bit much. And so it says, let's do Python. I say, okay, Python it is. Let's author a technical design and save it to arch.md. And I'll say I'll say be very detailed, just, to reinforce that. And then because I'm like a little paranoid about this, wait for my review. Wait for my review before coding. I just really like to say those things, and you don't really have to, but I'm just,
I understand. I do that often too, because sometimes it kicks off before I meant. Does it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's eager, and I've
Yeah.
I've seen tools, and it's fine. I'd rather, just like with someone who I work with, I'd rather them be eager and want to get right to it than
For sure.
have to prompt them and push them to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we'll go back to Zed.
Yeah, I do the same with the beaver bows or bee detail, or because
Exactly. And you can kind of you can go into a lot of detail with that, right? Or you can be very explicit even about what things you want to be very detailed on. Okay, so we can see here, it's going to use Python, it's going to use rich, it's going to use argparse. That's great. Gives us the file structure, gives us which components to use and how they're going to work. The logic flow. It's kind of giving us all these things, what goes into requirements. This is fine. In a more real example, even in the Vibe world, I'd probably have it go into even more detail. But for time's sake, we'll stick to that. And then I will go back to the terminal. And this is the other thing I do. And again, there's like MCPs that help with this and whatnot, but it's good to understand like the basic flow. Looks good. Now let's create a detailed task plan and save it to plan.md. And call these whatever you want. I just like arch and plan. It's generally what I use. Include in the plan.md some workflow, I'll say general workflow. Let's see, update plan.md when each task is completed with implementation notes. And I do this, for instance, because I don't. The session itself with the Gemini CLI will include. We'll kind of build up with everything it's done. But what if I like close it out and want to come back to it another day? I want as much continuity as possible with what it's done. So I'll have it, update arch.md with any design changes, etc. And then I will review, and then we'll start. Okay, so now it's going to create a task plan. And this is often where there's a lot of great MCPs for this, like shrimp and things like that. But I almost always do this explicitly because I want just a really great record of everything done. And here we can see it's going through. Says we can review it. So we'll go back to Z. And so we have plan.md. Okay, so it has some stuff up top, follow the plan, update things, so on and so forth. You notice it'll pause for my review and approval. Great. And then number one, the scaffolding, the viewer class, the executable script, so on and so forth. And then, it has a section for implementation notes. Great. So now we'll go back to the terminal. Let's do step one. And you can see I'm kind of enthusiastic with it. By the way, one thing that's really fun, and we'll do that. I'll show you in a second here, is oftentimes I ask the AI to talk to me in more colloquial ways. So it's real fast here. You can see, okay, so it did some scaffolding. So I'll just do ls right within the browser, or sorry, the terminal, and you can see it's created setup py, viewer py, and so forth, just like it said it would. Which is great. And so before it actually goes, I'll actually ask it to talk to me more colloquially. So I'll say, from here on out, address me as, we'll say K-bro. And use puns liberally. If you just want to make your life a little bit more fun. And so
that's a good advice, right? It becomes really more fun.
Right. Okay, so I can say, all right, K-bro, consider it done. I'll make sure my responses are of the highest quality.
I wish I could do it with like C++ compilers when they give me those errors that I can barely parse myself. Then okay.
And even like, I love this, like we're using the rich library. It says it's time to make this code look rich. So it's going to save this in the Gemini memory for me. And I'll say yes, which is really nice. And now it's going to move on to task 2 that I'll find remarkable, which is just hilarious. And here is, of course, for instance, sometimes these AI agents will not find we'll have a problem the first time trying to edit a file. So it'll just go fix that real fast. There we go. And then we're ready to move on. So yeah, shall I get that started, K-bro? Well, let's just look at one thing I want to show you is what it's done to the implementation file or the plan file. And here you can see it gave a little checkbox next to task 1. It gave a little checkbox next to task 2. And in the implementation notes, it said what it did, which is really nice. We can actually exit in and we could tell it start with the next task, review the plan, review the architecture, so on and so forth, which is really nice.
I love it because I use those save chat with the tag things, like when I want to preserve the conversation with like Gemini CLI itself. But I love the fact that you also actually preserve this whole flow in the project structure.
I want it all there, so I don't have to worry about saving the chat, and I can go to another computer then, right?
True.
Mm-hmm.
I can bring it down, and I can't do that as easily, right? Now, for instance, you notice it included the Gemini MD file that it edited to talk to me, call me K-bro, and use puns. That also is something I can float around, but that kind of thing is different than like my project architecture, right?
Yeah, true.
I can say, go for it, and it'll start doing task 3. And and we kind of keep going this way. I don't know what we have for time, but we have let's see, how many tasks were there? There were 5 altogether. So we're on 3. That's about done. I think we have time for all 5. Let's just keep going. Let's just say, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
And it'll be interesting to see if it even works, right? Because the first time it might not, and I'm kind of hoping it doesn't, so I can show you some ways to do like error handling, like deal with like you vibe something out and it doesn't work and all those kinds of things. Okay, so now it's done with that. Am I ready to see it all come together? It's asking about step 5. I'll say yes. And this is the final stage.
I'm so curious.
Drum roll. Please.
And there's some things it didn't do, right? Like, it hasn't set up a virtual env or anything like that. So, we'll see whether or not that causes some problems, for instance. And so it wants to do turn MD view into a executable. And now it wants to try this out and execute it. I generally don't have the CLI execute in line. And so instead of doing that, I'll just take this command here and I'll open up a new terminal window. Okay, cool. So I'll paste that in, MD view test.md. Let's see if it can break. Oh, no, it didn't break. It worked. So you can see here's bold text, italics text, inline code. I'm using the arrow keys to go back and forth. I'm hitting space to see all that work. And so all done.
Just like that. Just like that.
Just like that. So there you go. That was an example of vibe coding something, right? And
I really liked your process, Keith.
Yes, I love the process, and I love
Gonna
watching
pull some
people.
inspiration.
And I also like to see like different languages that you vibe coded and like you choose and you start with playing, which is kind of what um, is recommended with this kind of approaches. I also love the CLI, and you mentioned that you kind of fell in love with or refell in love in CLI again, and I think Gemini CLI in general and tools like that, they give you this power of first having this natural chat with the agent, and second having all those tools, including the tools that you can quickly run yourself, or like maybe you have a piece of code that you want to run, and you can just really jump back and forth and having this iterative process, which is something that I wanted to show today. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, Kid. I watched an interview, I think last month, and you said that filmmaking is one of your hobbies. Yeah. So you also mentioned that modern models and AI in general are not that really good in filmmaking. Obviously, like you probably know what you're doing. Um, on the other hand, there are people like me who have no clue in filmmaking, but like we still want to make films, especially after all those videos with the Yeti vlogs, and I want to make stuff like that. So I was curious, like, can I use Gemini CLI and all those tools, including MCP tools, to make that happen for myself? What I did is first, I started with a couple of files. First, Gemini.md, I certainly use it. But I also try to keep it kind of short because I usually reference like a more detailed instruction file, and then I add some additional instructions here if I need. This staged video generation instructions file is huge. It's actually largely vibed with Gemini, because I have no idea about video production. So I kind of asked Gemini, okay, I want to produce a proper video. And I also have a ton of guides that people created, to have character consistency and item consistency and scene consistency and all those rules that you use with the model. So I basically threw everything on Gemini and asked Gemini, like, oh, you're going to be my script writer and director of photography and casting director, and just pretty much everything. And these are the rules that I have. The tool usage, which you have like a separate file for, I also threw it in, and I just explained how you use tools and what tools I have. I use Imagen for initial shot generation. I use our new Nano Banana, aka Gemini 2.5 Flash image generation model to edit images, so we can transform between shots having a consistency. And obviously, I use the VO3 and with MCP tools and for video generation, and it has its own instructions too. One thing that I forgot to say, and it's important, is that in general, the most of the work is done by MCP servers for Gene Media, which is a part of the Vertex AI Creative Studio open source project that we have. So Imagen and VO3 I'm using through that. And this new special model, because there's no MCP tool for it yet, I was too lazy to create one. I just said like, oh, why didn't I write like a command line like tool that just does it for me, right? And it's faster for me than write an MCP server. And because I'm using Gemini CLI, I can just ask to use it. So the idea that I have, and that's what's different from UKIT, I'm like, I have no clue. So all I say is that I want to create a viral funny video with a capybara and doing like certain thing. And in this case, it's um, inviting all AI developers to accelerate AI with Cloud Run workshops to deep dive into code deployment and production grade AI workloads. That's all I have. That's like like a customer coming, like I have a product, I want to advertise it. Like, how do I do it?
Nice.
And I'm vibing, and I cannot say vibe coding. There's not much code generated through this. And first, it creates a creative brief. Then it goes through generating shot prompt, like the first shot prompt. And in that shot, we can see it now. And it uses Imagen for that. So this is my first shot. It's a very nice capybara. And now I'm ready to generate the video. This is the first part.
Hey AI devs, ready to ride the wave of innovation? Come join us for the Accelerate AI with Cloud Run workshops.
Now, this second part of the video required a bit of work because I had to go through multiple iterations with the model, basically generating something different that I wanted.
Yep.
You can see I'm editing the video, the image, and I want to change the image a bit, and I wanted to walk like on the water and just like walk effectively. The
Yep.
first try is not quite good. You see, like it rendered an extra hand, which is not good. Like capybaras don't have hands. And also, it didn't quite get, because I said along the beach, but I meant along the water line. So I'm like, let's fix it and see actually if it fixes the extra hand too. And I go through this, and I get a new shot with the same character. You see the consistency that this new image generation model can persist. So I have the same character, same location, it just walks on the water. Then I give this image to VO3, and I end up with a way better video, way better the second part. At the end, I basically call for another tool, which is part of these MCP toolbox that stitches two videos together, and I have the final video.
Yeah.
And here we go. We can watch it.
Hey AI devs, ready to ride the wave of innovation? Come join us for the Accelerate AI with Cloud Run workshops. Register now, and I'll see you there.
That's the workflow, which is again like a bit different from yours. I give a lot of instructions up front, and I do this, some of this work up front.
It's more realistic, I think, in many ways. Like, I'm showing you the you can do things without even doing a lot of that, but the more you can kind of detail things every step of the way, things are better off. And to your point, it's like, it's creation of all types, right? You should package all this up into an MCP with various tools for the various phases. I think that'd be great. I created a podcast creator recently, kind of like what you see in Notebook LM, but for a repo. And so the MCP basically says, you can basically tell the MCP, I want to create a podcast. I want it to be this long. I want these voices. I want it in this language. I want these accents. I want this intro music. And, it's the same kind of process there, right? Where you're stitching together all these tools along with AI generation to kind of take things to the next level and make what was impossible before. Like, you go back a few years, this would have been impossible for someone like you and I. And,
It still felt impossible.
Yeah, but you did it.
Yeah, even though one thing I learned, like you still need to have this creative talent and understanding and speak to the model using the right language. That's important. Like if you're filmmaking, you're going to spec the filmmaking language to Gemini, and it's just going to do much better if you try to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, and to your point, actually, for instance, in your film, you have the capybara looking at the camera, and then you edit, then you switch to another um, piece of the film where it's walking towards you, but because it's looking at you this way and it's looking at you the same way as it walks, the edit is actually a weird jump for people, and so you still have that face to come through, right? Which is like generally you want, like if you're doing that, then you want the next view to maybe be like a side profile view or something like that. And then in filmmaking, there's what's called the line, and you can't cross the line. Or like if you have dialogue between two people, you want over the shoulder, but which shoulder you go over as you switch, all that matters. And it's that part of that taste, right? And people, how do people build that taste? Well, Steven Spielberg had a Super 8 camera, and he made films from the time he was like 8 years old, and he just learned all those rules. And now the world's opened up so that you and I can learn all those rules, because we can make something and say, oh, okay, all the pieces were there, but I don't like how it looks. So something's off about it. And now you can easily and cheaply kind of iterate. Same way with code, right? You don't know all of the right ways to design something at first, or architect something. And then you can build things, and then you can understand, oh, this architecture has these flaws or these benefits, and how to compose them together, versus, that used to be a very lengthy learning process, and now it's sped up, which is fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. And for our listeners who want more information about the Accelerate AI with Cloud Run program that Vlad mentioned a bit earlier, it's a global developer series that includes workshops, labs, online content, and it's all designed to bridge that gap from a creative AI prototype to a secure, scalable production application. You can find the link to register in the description or via the QR code on the screen.
Thank you, Molly. And now it's time to move along to our developer Q&A.
Okay, so for the first one, user PMV143 on Reddit asked, if AI agents are going to handle more of the software lifecycle, how is Google Cloud thinking about the infrastructure bottlenecks? Things like cold starts, multi-model serving, and GPU utilization. Do you see a role for cloud platforms to serve this at the runtime layer, or will that be left to startups and open source?
I think, in terms of what any cloud provider, including GCP, does versus what startups do is always interesting to see. And I really hope that there's a healthy ecosystem of startups that try different things here. In terms of Google Cloud, I mean, we've already seen some really interesting things happen. Obviously, there's a whole host of Vertex features around both the frontier models, but also models from the model garden, and speeding up how quickly those can be deployed. Already a lot of work there, but there's also been a lot of work in GKE. And one thing I'm especially excited about is what Cloud Run's doing. We're all used to Cloud Run being this really developer friendly, very quick, very elastic, serverless solution. And Cloud Run now offers GPUs, and you can get that same experience with GPUs where you spin them up very quickly for what you want to do. And so you're going to continue to see new ideas coming out of Google Cloud to help with this stuff. But I also do think you'll see cool ideas coming from startups too.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll move on to the next question. So user Jortany on Reddit asked, I'm curious about the future of multi-cloud and edge deployment. With Google's moves towards infrastructure abstraction, like Agent Engine, is there sufficient interest to create a high-level service for the management orchestration of AI workloads running on Google Distributed Edge or multi-cloud?
I mean, it's a great question. I haven't heard a lot of that coming from customers, but the person who asked this question, I'd love for them to email me, and this is my first and last name at google.com, and tell me more about what they're looking at. Whether that's like a product or really great templates and samples of how to do that kind of thing. It'd be really worth exploring. I have a friend who has an IoT startup for microcontrollers, actually, and we've had many discussion about the possibilities there, and I think it is pretty untapped.
All right. And I've got one last one for you. For AI agents in areas like financial and legal services that require compliance and auditing, what key components and design choices should developers consider?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question, for a lot of like highly regulated industries. And I think what it comes down to, it's similar, and it's an analog to how you have your developers be more productive, but now you need to have a better CI/CD system. It's the same kind of thing when you're in a highly regulated industry and you're adding AI assistance to it. You need to have a really great compliance regime, both of what people do manually and what's automated. And you have to be very not only careful, but kind of determined and specific about how you're going to go about that. So the more mature you are when it comes to regulations and how you deal with those, the the easier it is going to be to add AI assistance. And I think in all of these cases, especially those cases, the human review piece becomes more important and more critical. And I think the low hanging fruit that should always be used is not necessarily to use AI to create the final product, but use AI to help validate, human product, or to explore ideas, things like that, where the regulatory burden may at times be lesser. So instead of being a lawyer and having it write a brief that you're going to submit to the court, have it brainstorm with you on the brief, or ways to construct your argument, or give it briefs and have it review it and give you critical feedback. I think those are great places to start in general with these kinds of things.
Mhm. Alrighty, so that's all the questions we have time for today. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions for us. And Keith, thank you so much for joining us on Agent Factory. It was a blast.
Thank you both. I had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what questions and cool code that people build next with AI agents.
Yeah, and we hope to see you again with inspiring demos and just the vision that you have in future episodes. Thank
Sounds
you.
great. I'll try to come back with I'll take your I'll want to sync up with you about the filmmaking code you got and what I've been doing, and maybe come back with a movie.
Oh yeah, that would be a very special episode.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Cool. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Keith.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And remember, all the resources that we mentioned are linked in the show notes.
Join us for our next episode, where we'll be tackling another critical topic for production agents. Until then, keep your code clean and your agents smart. I'm Vlad Kolesnikov.
And I'm Molly Pettit. Power
Powering
down.